Before mall Santas and visions of Amazon deliveries danced in their heads, there was another way to keep children and adults on the straight and narrow come Christmas time. They were called ghost stories. Now, the ghost story went the way of the dinosaur in America, but in Victorian England they were part of the fabric of Christmas. The good old days when you could scare your children half to death before tucking them into bed on Christmas Eve. Thank you, Charles Dickens. So, in the spirit of giving, we're bringing back that most cherished of holiday traditions and present to you some true ghost stories. And they are, ho ho ho, extremely strange. When you think of the spirit of Christmas and spreading good tidings to all, you might not immediately think of Alcatraz prison, but it was the site of a bizarre Christmas story in the 1940s. During that time, Warden James Johnston decided to throw a Christmas party at his house on the island. There was music and laughter, and otherwise it was a very festive party. But during the gathering, a phantom figure appeared before the stunned partygoers who were eating and drinking around a stove. He was described as wearing a gray suit, brimmed cap, and sporting mutton chop sideburns. All the guards assembled there could do was stare at the spectral figure in shock for a full minute before anyone could speak or move. It was then that the air in the room became freezing cold, and the fire that was blazing in the Ben Franklin stove completely extinguished itself. Then, after a few more anxious moments, the phantom visitor simply vanished, and the party came to an abrupt end. Hever Castle, which is nestled deep in the British countryside of Kent, was once home to the Boleyn family. Anne Boleyn, the most well-known member, lived the early part of her life there, before she married King Henry VIII. Within a few short years of her marriage, however, Anne was targeted by dissent and gossip within the castle, accusing her of everything from witchcraft to incest to adultery. After giving birth to a stillborn male child, Henry annulled the marriage and instead took on one of her handmaidens, Jane Seymour, as his wife. Eventually, her ex-husband formally accused Anne of those salacious charges, and she was ultimately executed. It's said whenever Anne feels pangs of heartache or yearns to return to her childhood home, she does so in spirit form, but only on one day of the year, Christmas Eve. It's been said her somber specter is seen drifting silently over the picturesque bridge that spans the River Eden, in the grounds of the home where she knew much happiness, and from which she embarked upon a journey that would change the course of English history. Perhaps no photographic evidence of spirits is as famous as that of the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. But who was the Brown Lady? In 1713, the owner of the hall, Charles Townshend, married a young lady named Dorothy Walpole. The couple happily lived there for a number of years, until Townshend convinced himself that his wife had carried on an affair outside the marriage with Lord Wharton, a notorious royal playboy. His obsessive jealousy eventually drove him to madness, and he kept Dorothy hidden inside the hall, going so far as to tell friends and family she had tragically passed away, going so far beyond that as to hold a mock funeral. Dorothy stayed confined to the mansion, wandering its halls in solitude, until her actual death in 1726 of smallpox, never having set foot outside the hall after essentially being imprisoned there by her husband. The first sighting of Dorothy's ghost was during a Christmas celebration at Raynham in 1835. A guest claimed to have seen a woman wandering the halls in a brown dress. A male guest confirmed seeing the same figure, and when he had approached her in the hall, she turned to him with a glowing face, but where her eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets. Some members of the staff became so frightened of the brown lady, it's said they fled the house entirely. A year later, Captain Frederick Marriott, a friend of Charles Dickens, requested an overnight stay at Raynham Hall in order to dispel the rumors of the haunting. He later told his daughter Florence he had actually encountered the brown lady, who was holding a lighted lamp she used to illuminate her features, and grinning in a malicious and diabolical manner. He went on to tell Florence that he had chased her down the hall with a revolver in hand, firing a shot that passed through her and into some paneling. It was in September of 1936 when a photographer and his assistant visited Raynham Hall to photograph the estate for Country Life magazine. All was going well until they snapped a shot of the grand staircase, and were readying for a second. After taking that one, the assistant took note of the misty figure descending the steps, who would go on to become known as the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, with many believing it is actually the lingering spirit of Dorothy Walpole. America is home to more than its share of haunted hotels, and among the creme de la creme is the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Since it was built in the 1880s, the building has been a hotbed of tragedies and, as a result, ghost stories. Of all the spectral sightings and legends associated with the Crescent, one stands out to the present day and is a staple of tours and ghost hunts held there. It was Christmas time, and as usual, the lobby was adorned by an enormous tree to celebrate the holidays. Guests would typically come to view the tree, but one year they got the proverbial lump of coal in their sock when the tree and all of the packages underneath were found moved to the other side of the room. To complete the transition, all the chairs were moved either to circle or face the tree. Normally, one would assume a merry prankster among the visitors or staff had staged the apportation of the tree and its gifts to a different location, but at the time there had been prior reports of spirits in Victorian clothing wandering through the hotel dining room. They were described as being playful in moving both gifts and furniture around, and that was shocking enough. But when the staff reported to work the following day, they discovered everything was placed back exactly where it was originally located. On another occasion, staff arrived in the morning to find the dining room in perfect order, except for all the menus had been scattered about the room. On December 25th, 1890, a story appeared on the front page of the Victoria, British Columbia newspaper, The Daily Colonist. It reads, "Just as the clock was striking midnight, ushering in the joyous Christmas day, a misdeed as dark, cowardly, and mysterious as ever disfigured the history of this province was perpetuated. The victim was David Fee. He was 21 years old, and after attending a costume party, was walking to meet his parents for midnight mass at nearby St. Andrew's Cathedral. Fee was dressed in a white clown costume he borrowed from a friend, and had just arrived at the corner where the cathedral was located, when a man burst out from the shadows and aimed a double-barrel weapon directly at him. The man simply said, 'You challenged me.' Apparently, this man had been drinking whiskey and mistook Fee for a laborer who had admonished him for flying an Irish independence flag. The laborer typically wore a white overcoat, which resembled Fee's costume that night. Before Fee could speak, the man fired, and Fee perished within moments. Ever since that tragic night, Fee's ghost is rumored to roam the streets outside the cathedral, as well as his gravesite." A few weeks prior to Christmas in 1878, Edward Smith was sitting in his home at 136 Clinton Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, now known as the Lefferts Laidlaw House, when the doorbell rang. When he answered it, he found no one standing outside. What may have seemed like a childish prank became a nightly occurrence. The doorbell ringing with no one responsible for it, and no clues left as to who it might be. A frustrated Smith came upon the idea of sprinkling some ash and flour on the walkway to reveal footprints of whomever the prankster was. Yet even as the bell continued to ring, no prints were found in his clever trap. The doorbell ringing soon gave way to aggressive banging on the doors, and no matter where the family or their tenants were gathered in the house, the source of the sounds could not be identified. Mr. Smith, perhaps trying to calm his family, attributed it to the wind. Becoming a bit more anxious and concerned, Edward contacted the police to report the odd occurrences. Officers were dispatched who would spend the night in the home, experiencing the same phenomena, but they too were at a loss for an explanation. Police would then set a trap and hide around the outside of the house. And this time when the bell rang, it was answered by Police Captain McLaughlin, who found no one there. Soon after that, a brick was thrown through the window, and though police officers were standing nearby on the walkway leading to the front door, they confirmed they saw no one responsible. After this, the authorities spent a great deal of time investigating the home, but never could solve the cause of the disturbances. After 3 weeks' time, all went suddenly quiet, leading Smith to conclude that he and his family were victims of a series of paranormal events. Afterwards, the home became a meet-up spot for gawkers and spiritualists seeking access to perform seances, but Mr. Smith denied their efforts to do so. A possible source for the haunting was a lawyer who allegedly committed suicide in the house. For his part, Smith concluded the culprit was actually Satan himself, who he claimed to have driven off by reciting a long and earnest prayer. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville held the title of Earl of Essex and was a prominent landowner during the 1100s. His title wielded him great influence over royal politics, but when a debate involving Stephen and Matilda as to the rightful heir to the throne ensued, Matilda was denounced, resulting in de Mandeville's being immediately stripped of a great deal of his worldly possessions by Stephen and excommunicated from the church. During that excommunication, Sir Geoffrey was killed on the battlefield, but due to his expulsion, he was not granted a proper Christian burial, which leads many to the conclusion his spirit is trapped within this mortal coil. It's also been alleged that Sir Geoffrey placed a curse on the properties he owned, that decrees if they were ever taken from him, whomever betrayed him would feel the curse of the Almighty God himself. It became a source of legend that every 6 years on Christmas Eve, he and a headless dog would haunt the lands draped in a red cloak. On Christmas Eve night in 1932, a group of people met at the Pimsbrook Bridge in East Barnet. At midnight, they heard uncanny sounds and followed them south till they reached Monk's Frith, where they came upon the ghost of a headless hound bursting through the fog. A few minutes later, a knight clad in silver armor, wearing a red cloak, followed the same path. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania is known for obvious reasons as the Christmas city, and the town goes all out in its celebration of the holiday. It is also renowned for its plethora of ghostly tales and haunted locations. The Hotel Bethlehem is no exception. Its primary haunting is attributed to a young woman named Mary Yohe. Mary was born in 1866 with a love for singing and performing. She gained great attention for her talents, displaying them not only in the U.S. but in Paris and throughout Europe. She became a member of British aristocracy when she married a wealthy lord. But the marriage was short-lived as her husband went bankrupt, and her next husband, an American soldier, would steal from her. The best years of her life would be those she spent performing at the Hotel Bethlehem, and to this day, especially at Christmas time, staff and guests still report her presence in the form of an apparition dressed elegantly in lace and satin, singing some of her favorite songs near the lounge piano or next to the Christmas tree display. Another Christmas ghost at the Bethlehem is that of Francis Daddy Thomas, a jovial, beloved sort, who is essentially the town guide. His spirit remains at the hotel, still greeting guests, and is especially visible at Christmas, where visitors report being welcomed by a man in old-fashioned garb in the lobby, who vanishes as they attempt to speak to him. Our story involves the legend of the Mistletoe Bride, a tale that's been told for centuries. While its origin is not easy to establish, it's thought that its basis lies in the disappearance of the would-be bride of Lord Lovell inside the Bramshill house in Hampshire, England. As the story goes, Lord Lovell planned to wed a young woman related to Sir John Cope, the owner of Bramshill House. As this was close to Christmas time, mistletoe had been hung throughout the mansion, so the wedding party decided to have some fun with that by playing what amounted to a game of hide-and-seek. The bride-to-be would conceal herself somewhere in the mansion, with the groomsmen attempting to find her. Whomever did so would receive a kiss from her. The game commenced with the bride going into hiding, and her pursuers scouring the home in hopes of discovering her. As time went on and hours passed, they still could not find her. Before long, a sense of urgency and trepidation set in, and what started out as a game turned into a frenzied search for her whereabouts. The soon-to-be bride was never found, with some claiming she had simply changed her mind about the marriage and had run off. The years passed and Lord Lovell grew old and gaunt, but remained determined to locate his lost love. Most thought he was just slipping into madness in his advancing years. Then there came a day, 50 years after her disappearance, that he was running his hand over the oak paneling of a room on the top floor. He had done this on a myriad of occasions, but on this day he touched a specific spot of the ornately carved woodwork. The paneling sprung open, revealing a secret closet which contained a beautifully carved ancient oak chest with iron bindings that had likely been used for storage of important documents. Lord Lovell felt an odd combination of relief and dread wash over him as he went to fetch some tools which he used to break open the chest. To his horror, within the chest lay the skeleton of his bride, still wearing the stunning dress in which she had last been seen. The gown was yellowed and blemished by age and decay, and a bony hand was frozen in a grotesque manner, as if still desperately trying to open the door of her unintended tomb. It soon became clear the young bride had previously known of the secret closet and had hidden herself inside, hoping to present her pursuers with a more challenging task in finding her. She had stepped inside the chest and closed its lid in order to conceal herself. But the lid was heavy and closed with considerable force, locking itself in place, making it impossible for her to lift it from the inside. As a result, the playful game of hide-and-seek had instead resulted in an untimely death. Built in the 16th century, just outside the small town of Beccles in the county of Suffolk, sits Roos Hall, rumored to be one of the most haunted places in England. Stories abound with sightings of ghosts and terrifying apparitions. About 100 feet from the driveway stands a giant oak tree, protected by a fence preventing anyone from getting too close to it and compromising its historical significance. It's been said centuries ago, a gibbet stood where the tree now stands. A gibbet was a particularly brutal form of public execution, which involved the criminal offender being locked in a metal cage and left to die from exposure. Hundreds suffered that fate there before the oak tree replaced it as the primary means of capital punishment by hanging. But the most terrifying story involves the headless horseman who has been seen riding toward people driving on the road to Rus. Allegedly, every December 24th, Christmas Eve, he is seen racing down the driveway with his phantom coach and 4 horses. With all this expected clatter going on, the event instead is bathed in eerie silence. In Lidington, Michigan sits an old Victorian home, once occupied by the Stark family, who at the time were wealthy barons of the lumber industry. Those who have paid visit to and reside in the house claim their spirits still linger there, with Christmas time being the most active part of the year. The Starks were something of an eccentric lot, with one daughter, Vera, being the most peculiar of the clan. She would often take to sitting in the front yard, picking dandelions, wearing nothing but a fur coat with nothing on beneath it. Her ghost is often seen, sometimes even around Christmas, performing that same task wearing, or not wearing, the same apparel. In addition, the ghost of another of the Stark daughters, who hanged herself in the 4th floor gymnasium, is said to have been spotted wandering through the halls of the home. The current owners of the home have attempted to open the house to historical tours, but ran into some otherworldly obstacles. Quote, "Our spirits did not care for it being open to the public, and went wild, for lack of better words, that evening. Objects flying through the house, windows opening and slamming closed, those types of things. But we've grown accustomed to the ghosts. If we hear a noise or the rocking chairs are rocking, we just talk to them and ask them how their day was and go about our business." So we hope you've enjoyed this spreading of holiday cheer, and maybe, just maybe, the holiday ghost story will make a comeback at your house this year. And perhaps we'll all come to realize that the Flintstones, Charlie Brown, Rudolph, and Frosty are all in the pockets of Big Christmas, and we need a little more sleigh on Christmas Day.